Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. This is session 7AP presented by Marna Wally. This is the second part of the upgrade to zOS version 2.5. The part one was yesterday, of course. So Marna will continue her presentation. Like yesterday, any questions, please do raise them in the chat box and Marna will be answering them at specific stopping points during her presentation. So Marna, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Ryu. So I'm very happy to be back for part two today. We're going to talk about upgrading to zOS 2.5. And these are going to be the technical actions that you're going to need to do. Now, recall that yesterday we talked about planning, and that was a lot of the requirements, remember? And one of the biggest things on the requirement is the driving system requirement for zOS 2.5 after January of 2022. All right, as usual, my email is on the cover. If you have any questions at all, please let me know. And if I don't know the answer, I know somebody that knows the answer, so I can get you an answer right away if you need that. I want to show you this little icon I have here on the left. I used to have a picture of a migrating goose that was on the, that was my upgrading motif or icon that I had. But, we don't migrate anymore. We really call it an upgrade to kind of make sure that you know that you're getting more functions as you move to higher releases. And I really hope that upgrading has become easier over time. So I was looking for an icon and I thought the escalator was the best icon that we could have for upgrading now. So let's get moving right away. Okay, so I'm going to talk about upgrading actions, the technical actions in this portion of the presentation. I'll cover those that are coming from zOS 2.3 to 2.5. and also those that are coming from 2.4 to 2.5. However, I'm not going to cover a whole lot about what happened in 2.4 because that was 2 years ago. So if you're on 2.3, I'm only going to cover just the very biggest highlights of zOS 2.4. And do remember that in part one planning, we talked a lot about the important upgrade actions in 2.4, like user key common removal and SMB removal as well. So here are the list of the elements that I will go through in this hour-long presentation for what we have time to talk about. So as you know, upgrading to a new release is really kind of a two-step process. The first thing you do is you upgrade, or the old term was migration, and you'll just put the new release in of a release that you previously had, and then you'll get it stabilized. And so you won't really probably use any new functions. You'll just get it in, get it working to the baseline that what you had before. And then hopefully you can see in grayed out items here is the next thing you'll do is exploitation. So when you get the release in, you've done the upgrade and it's stabilized, then hopefully you have time to look at a lot of the new functions that we have in the release. And I'm not going to cover exploitation. I already talked a lot about the exploitation items in the What's New in zOS 2.5 presentation. And at GSE, there's been a ton of other what's new and exploitation in particular areas that you can look as well. So as a recall, I always do this. How do we classify upgrade actions so that we can help you identify what they're for? First of all, we classify those as required, meaning that everybody has to do it, right? So for zOS 2.5, you have to IPL on a Z13 or higher. Everybody has to do that. There's no way around that one. So that would be a required upgrade action. The second category we have is required if. So this would be a conditional upgrade action. If you're using this function, then you have to do an upgrade action. So I call those required if in this presentation. And then the last category is recommended, and I'm always trying to make people's lives easier, hopefully. So I want you to look at the recommended upgrade actions as well, because they may be required in the future, right? That's something that we want to look at. Maybe you can take care of that right now, and then your workload in the future is less. Or if you do this upgrade action, it might resolve some sort of an extra tedious task that you might have to do in the future. So kind of do it once and never have to do it again, those kind of items as well. Also, we classify technical upgrade actions for when they can be performed, because I'd like you to be able to spread your upgrade work over time and not just have a huge blob of work to do at the very end. So I would like you to see, what you can do now, what you can do after you've installed 2.5, but before you've IPL'd it, and then what you actually have to do after 2.5 has been IPL'd. Okay, so I'd like to spread the work out. And of course, you can start on the ones that are classified as now on 2.3 and 2.4. As always, I have little icons because I like icons. A fire means don't overlook. This is my personal view, that this is a very important upgrade action and that you'll want to pay attention and wake up on this one and make sure that you're okay. These are the ones where I've seen customers have problems, not necessarily that they're difficult, but I want to bring your attention to them because they're apt to give you a little bit of problems if you don't pay attention. Remember, the red check mark means programmatic assistance is available, which means health checks. You guys know I'm a health check fan, so you really should be using health checks to help with your upgrade path. And then the last icon is the broom, and that just means it's a hygiene item. So we've obsoleted some options, some parameters that you might want to just remove because you don't need to specify them anymore. And how confusing when you have something in your Palm Live member and somebody goes to look at it or to maintain it, and they see something there that actually is not being used. Or when you go initialize the function, it says, you told me, you wanted me to use this option, but I don't have that option anymore. So I'm going to produce a warning message for you. I don't like stuff like that. So let's look at the hygiene actions as well, because I like a clean Palm Live and configuration files. So the scope of the presentation, like I had mentioned, it's from 2.3 to 2.5 or 2.4 to 2.5. However, heavy emphasis is going to be on from 2.4 to 2.5. So I'll mostly talk about the new stuff that is happening in zOS 2.5. Now, remember, where can you find all of the technical upgrade actions? You guys know the answer to that. The answer is the upgrade workflow. And remember that we ship the upgrade workflow. It's not available on GitHub anymore. It's available in your product exactly with a PTF. So if you use the coexistence fixcat, you can find it in user LPP BCP upgrade. And you should be using that upgrade workflow to identify everything that you have on your system. Also, we've exported it and put it on the IBM documentation website. It is not a lovely file on the documentation website because I really want you to use zOSMF and use the value that you can get from having it in its native interface. Remember, you just pick the workflow that is appropriate for you. 2.3 to 2.5, 2.4 to 2.5. You don't have to do more than one workflow. All right, so if I look at all of the elements that have sections in the upgrade workflow from 2.4 just to 2.5, so these are the ones that have added items to it. You'll see that they're all the ones that are on this chart. I don't have time to talk about every one of them. The ones that you see in blue with the little blue box or the green box, those are items that I don't cover at all. You can go and look into the upgrade workflow or the exported upgrade workflow if you like for those. I just kind of ran out of time and they weren't that significant. That's why I didn't include them. So the first thing I said, I'm not going to talk about exploitation, but this is the one slide that I have that I'm going to talk about exploitation. And that's because I want to give you a complete picture of what new address spaces we have been adding in each zOS release since zOS 2.3. So if you look at the bottom of this chart, you'll see that new in 2.4, these are green address spaces, meaning that they're for exploitation on this slide. So we had the new priced feature for ZAX, the authorized code scanner. The name of that address space is likely to be BPN ZAX, should you choose to purchase that priced feature and use it. And remember, this can look at testing your PC and SVC routines to help you identify security exposures. Okay, so that's ZAX, and that would be the name of that address space that you can use should you use that priced feature. The other address spaces that we had new in zOS 2.4 was for ZCX, and you can have one or more of those. And remember, the ZCX address spaces is where you can run a Docker container that has been identified as Linux on Z, and you can run that intact right inside that zOS address spaces. So you don't have to use ZCX. Remember, ZCX has a dependency on either the hardware feature code or the Container Hosting Foundation software product. So those two, ZAX and ZCX, are exploitation address spaces. But if we look in 2.5, we don't have any new address spaces. Okay, so let's keep moving. As I'd mentioned before, in planning part 1, we removed some elements, and those elements have data sets and some paths. And so we will talk about, there are some removed data sets that you'll need to clean up from that. And we also removed some elements in 2.4. So likewise, we'll have some removal as well. What I did want to mention, and I'll talk more about it in just a couple minutes, is the RMF restructure. So remember, I talked a little bit about how we have RMF being restructured in zOS 2.5. Functions are absolutely identical, no change in behavior of the functions. It's just the packaging and installation configuration work that's a little bit different. We'll talk about that on its own slide. New data sets, we've got a new InfoPrint server path that added in zOS 2.5. And then we also had, remember, ZCX that was added in 2.4. And we have a new mount point and a new file system for that as well. Now for health checks, it's recommended if you customize health checks and we customize health checks, our data is probably going to be higher than your date. And that means that our changes will be used instead of your changes. And that means if you customize HZSPRM ParmLive member for these affected checks, that probably we won't be using what you wanted. So we want you to take a look at your HZSPRM ParmLive member. In your handout for this presentation, I have a list of all the new changed and deleted checks. So you want to take a look at that. One of the changed checks in zOS 2.5 is RACF sensitive resource check. That's the check that changed here. And as you know, that check, at least for me, is hard to get running successfully. There's a lot of things in that check. And now there is even more things in that check to do validation on. So to kind of be aware of that with a heads up. Okay, so any questions on the chat about some of the general upgrade items that we have here? New address spaces, data sets added incoming, health checks, anything like that? Okay, let's keep moving. Okay, so now let's move to the BCP. And what have we done in the BCP for changes in 2.5? If I'm going to lump them all together, the big thing is default changes. Okay, now all of these have default changes that we think are better to do on a release boundary. And you have the opportunity, if you like, to revert back to them, but we don't want you to. We would rather you try to use the new defaults. So the first one we have up here is the DS limit num. This is in the SMF lim ParmLive member. And the DS limit num is the value, which is the maximum number of data spaces and hyperspaces that can be created by a user key program. Okay. So you can see prior to zOS 2.5, this number was absolutely massive. And you can see that number is way too big for a system, especially for a user key program. So what we have in zOS 2.5 is we've lowered the default down to somewhat a reasonable number, 4,096. If you would like to know the high water mark on your system on what you're using for this, you can look in SMF record 30, and you can see the number of data spaces high watermark, and that will indicate to you whether you're exceeding 4,096 today, or if that 4,096 default is going to be adequate for you. So take a look at that if you'd like. You can change this value if you would like, of course. Okay. The next set of defaults that we've got in zOS BCP is that we are going to back the ASCB and the WEB, the work element block, into 64-bit real storage. Previously, these were backed into 31-bit storage. So we want to do something with virtual storage constraint relief here to help with this. And that is why we'll move it into 64-bit real storage. However, if you had any customization or application that was issuing the load real address instruction in 31-bit storage, you'll be affected by this if you're referencing the ASCB or the WEB data structures. So if that is the case, you can change those applications such that you can accommodate 64-bit storage, or if you'd like, you can override the whole thing, and in your diag ParmLive member, you can set these two control blocks to be back down in 31-bit storage. I hope you wouldn't have to do that. So this may be something that you want to just test on a system to make sure that you're okay, so that you can take advantage of that new default of the ASCB and the WEB in 64-bit storage. And the last BCP default change that we see here is the check region loss default change. So this is something that's also coming out of DIAG, and it actually represents the amount of region size loss that you can be tolerated in an initiator address space. So when the job ends on the initiator, we're going to look at the maximum number of region size and see if it's been decreased by that value. And if it has, then we'll terminate the initiator and restart it again. So what we've done is we've picked some sweet spot, we believe, here for the check region loss default value, and you can see it here. And we think that probably is about the right number to have on a system. However, you can change it, or if you don't want it to apply at all, you can set it to a very high value. Okay. So what I would do is I would use the health check associated with this, see what value you have today, and we'll tell you what the future default is going to be in zOS 2.5 and see if that's going to be acceptable for you. Okay, that was BCP. Any questions about BCP? And remember, it's default changes for BCP. No big shakes in DCP for 2.5. All right, so now moving on to DFSMS. For DFSMS, I just have one slide on DFSMS, and they're both 2.4 upgrade actions. So DFSMS and 2.5 didn't have anything worth note at all. So just as a reminder on zOS 2.4, if you're going to overwrite a PDSE using a copy or a restore action, you're going to need to specify, first of all, you need to close the PDSE data set. That's the best way if you want to overwrite it. But if you didn't want to close it, then you need to specify tolerate NQ failure, and that will indicate that you're really responsible for ensuring that the data is consistent because you haven't closed the data set before you overwrite it. The second item on this slide is from DFSMS DFP, and it is just default changes that's in the ANTXIN XRC PARM lib members. The old default that you can see here, very old, and these are really more reasonably or new defaults that we've added in zOS 2.4. So you can use those today. Even if you've started to specify these new defaults today, and now they're being, hard coded on the system as the new defaults, you can go and clean those out and take those out of there if you like. Okay, any questions about DFSMS? There's really no big items in DFSMS for 2.5 at all. Okay, let's move on to HCD. Now, we haven't talked about HCD upgrade actions in a very long time, but what we've done in HCD 2.5 is we've removed some support for unsupported processor types, and these are really old unsupported processors. These are unsupported processors way back as of zOS 2.2, and remember that zOS 2.2 will not coexist with 2.5, so these were perfectly safe for us to remove. So if in your IODF you have a Z10, Z9, Z990, or Z900 still defined in that IODF, you need to remove those configurations or you will not properly validate your IODF. So just check that today. That's something that you can do right now, easy to do. A lot of people I've seen have already done this a long time ago. It's just that HCD formally will not support those in an IODF, so it won't validate anymore. So take a look at that. All right, now let's look at our first fire item here in the part 2 technical upgrade actions, and it's for RMF. And it's not because it's difficult to do. It's just that I want everyone to pay attention to this because there will probably be everybody's going to be affected if you're an RMF user. And so you'll want to pay attention to this. And I do know we have a lot of RMF users. So what we have done is we've restructured RMF, and it's now into 3 elements. Okay, so if you look at the left-hand side of this top table, in 2.3 and 2.4, we had a priced feature called RMF. Okay, everything's fine. You're ordering it, you get it, everything's fine, and it uses the SERB data sets. But what happens in zOS 2.5? It's now split into 3 pieces. So let's look at the bottom first. First of all, we have a base element that's free to use. Anybody can use the data gatherer piece. This was one of the pieces that it was split into. So that's, you can see here is black because it's just a base element. And then we have the other pieces above it is actually split into two pieces. One of it is RMF and the other one is the Advanced Data Gatherer, or ADG. Now, if you are an RMF customer, you just order RMF just like you have before, and that will entitle you to RMF and ADG. Okay, and of course, everybody can use the data gatherer as well. So I wanted to include here the IFA PRD feature name because I like to keep track of what's in my ParmLive member. So if you order RMF from Shop Z, you'll see you're entitled to RMF and also the Advanced Data Gatherer. And then, you know, there could be a case where you don't use the RMF monitor, but you still want to do advanced data gathering in associated SMF records. And so you could just purchase the Advanced Data Gatherer should you choose to. I think most customers that are RMF, they're just going to purchase an RMF, and then they're going to get those two price features themselves. However, what happens in Data Gatherer, in the Advanced Data Gatherer, is we have new data sets. And so if you're an RMF user, you have to accommodate that because you are going to use the functions underneath RMF, and you'll need to put those in your configuration. So in 2.3 and 2.4 RMF, we used to have the SERB link data set. You guys knew that very well. You had it in your link list. It was APF authorized. Everything was good. And you also had the SERB CLS data set, which is your proc that you had. So in 2.5, for the data gatherer in the Advanced Data Gatherer, we've got new data sets. It's sgrb link and sgrb LPA. So you need to put sgrb link into the link list and APF authorize it. And you need to have sgrb LPA into the LPA list. So that's something that you've got to use if you're a data gatherer or an Advanced Data Gatherer user. And also the sgrb CLS needs to be used for sysproc as well. That's where the proc is going to be found. Okay, so these you can see we have a new 3-character prefix GRB, and that's for that data gatherer advanced and basic functions that we have within the zOS 2.5. But then for RMF, we also have a change too as well, is that SERB link data set got converted to a PDSE. So now the name of the data set is SERB link E, okay, and we don't have SERB link anymore at all. It was converted to a PDSE with a new name, and that SERB link E needs to be put into the link list and APF authorized as well. We don't have anything in the LPA list for RMF specifically. Okay, but remember the RMF has a dependency on ADG and DG, the data gatherer. So if you're an RMF customer, remember you just order RMF. That's all you do on Shop Z. And then you need to do the customization both for the data gatherer, the Advanced Data Gatherer, and RMF. So you need to do what's in column 1 and what's in column 2. So that means you're going to have link list APF, LPA list, and have sysproc changes in order to do. Not hard to do, just don't forget to do it and make sure you use the right names of the new data sets. If you're just going to be a data gatherer and an Advanced Data Gatherer user and not a regular RMF customer, then you just do what's in column 1. Also, you will have some security considerations in order to do, because we had some class program profiles that we had, which were specifying the old data set names, and now they have to specify the new data set names. And so there's samples in the handout for this presentation. There's about, I don't know, about six or seven that you have to add, and like 3 or 4 you have to remove. Okay, so there's a little bit of security work that you need to accommodate this. So this is all of the RMF structural changes. Again, functions are all identical, the same. You order it in Shop Z, all the same. It's just that you got to accommodate some ParmLive and ProcLive changes. So any questions at all about RMF? I tried to get everything onto one slide so you could see it in one shot. Okay, let's keep moving here. All right. Next thing is some default communication server types of changes to make it more secure. So these are all back on zOS 2.4, and I do like to talk about this in the 2.5 presentation because I want to make sure that you're aware that these default change. And if you haven't been paying attention or you wanted to, know that this was going on, I think it's good to do. I've made this a fire item because there's sometimes some extra work that might need to be done. For the first one is SIM. SIM is going to have a default communication change from HTTP to HTTPS. PKI services The first PKI web page where it delivers you the CA root certificate. It used to be done in HTTP, and now you'll need to find a different way of receiving that CA root certificate, such as email or something like that. And that will give you more secure communications. Second slide on this is InfoPrint Central is going to require SSL connections by default. This means you need to enable SSL for the IBM HTTP server Apache. RMF, you can configure ATTLS to have secure communications with RMF DDS. You do that in the GPM serve parmlib member. You can see the new default is HTTPS ATTLS, and the old default was HTTPS. No, we have a health check in order to ensure that you're using the better communication method. And then for the ISPF gateway, we had a default change from HTTP to HTTPS. So if you look at all of these, you can see how by default on the release boundary, we want more secure communications for zOS. Next one is crypto. So this is an item that is super easy to do. Just look in your crypto proc and make sure your CSF parm DD, the data set that you're pointing to, is not a sequential data set. It has to be a PDS member. So you're going to need that there. Also, this one at the bottom, I don't think hardly anyone is going to hit it, but I did want to mention it. What is happening in zOS 2.5 for crypto? And remember, that was HCR 77 dog 2. I'm going to get out of the habit of talking the FMIDs hopefully pretty soon, but it is the 2.5 level of crypto. Because what we've done in that level on the release boundary is we removed some really old crypto parts. These were last updated in zOS 1.9. So that's not a typo. So that's how old these are. Now, when we have removed these old parts, it won't affect any of your existing applications. They will still continue to run just as is. However, if you had any programs that you wanted to recompile or relink and referenced these removed parts, that's where you'll have to change so that you could recompile or relink it. So here you can see the changes. If you had, the specific includes for these, here's the new header file, and you use a different side deck as well. Okay, so these are really easy to change. If you happen to do a recompile or a relink, remember existing applications, they will continue to run the way that they've run. Okay, so no problem there, and hopefully not many people have that as an impact. All right, any questions before we move into zOSMF? Okay, so remember in zOS 2.3, we had a fire item for an upgrade action, which was auto start. And that would be that zOSMF would automatically start at IPL for you. And that's what really we relied upon, that every zOS 2.3 system either has zOSMF or has access in the sysplex to a system that has zOSMF. So that was a rather large upgrade action that we had in 2.3, but luckily, we're really past that now, because 2.5 and 2.3, you've already gone through the 2.3 change, and so 2.4 and 2.5 is where we're looking at now. And there are not a lot of hard upgrade actions at all for zOSMF. And in fact, when I look at all of the upgrade actions for zOSMF, I think they're all like good things, right? It's a good thing that we made these changes as an upgrade action. So the biggest one in that category is the new desktop interface. I say new, it's been around for a while, but now in zOS 2.5, it's the only interface to use. And I like this interface. It took me a little while to get used to it, but I'm very familiar with it now. And I want to point out a couple of things. So first of all, when I went into the desktop interface, I noticed, oh my gosh, I don't have as many plugins as I did before. I wonder if they got lost. Well, they didn't get lost. What they are, and where you'll probably find them if you're like me, if you look in the App Center folder, and the App Center folder is this little icon on the lower left side. If you click on that and open up the App Center, here you'll see all of those functions that you had before. And I think it's just kind of tidying up your desktop interface by putting more things into the App Center. So if you can't find what you were looking for, go into the App Center. It's probably there. And then what you can do is you can drag it out onto your desktop so that you have it all there all the time. So that's what I've done for the things that I use the most, like workflows, workflow editor, software management, sysplex management. I've dragged all those out. Okay, the other thing I wanted to point out on the desktop interface is you can create your own folder with your favorite apps. I really like this. So if I have, my own cool stuff, I can put stuff in there, and then I know that, that's the stuff I might want to access a lot and not have to go digging around, and it won't clutter up my desktop. Also, I did want to point out something down here, which is a little magnifying glass. That's called the data set and file search interface. And that has a lot of common and handy tasks while you're in zOSMF. If you wanted to look at a data set or edit a file or submit, a JCL job and look at the output, you could do it all out of that little magnifying glass. So you can go there, and it has, type ahead functions that you can allocate a data set and model it after. It's a very powerful function. So if you want to stay within zOSMF and you don't really necessarily want to go and log on to, TSO and go into ISPF, you can stay on zOSMF, and in that magnifying glass for the data set and file search, you can do a lot of functions in there. All right, so what else have we done in 2.5 as an upgrade action for zOSMF is that we have removed a REST API for the mobile notification service. Okay, so we still have other notifications tasks that you can use, such as email notification as well. The other one is use the diagnostic assistant within zOSMF to collect diagnostic data. So the diagnostics information that we had used to be found on the zOSMF general settings task, and now it is its own application in its own right on the desktop. And it will be in the application center probably when you go to look for it. But I really love the zOSMF diagnostic assistant, because this is letting zOSMF collect all of the zOSMF diagnostics for you. No more do you have to, as a human, go collect things for zOSMF to do debug on. You can now do that within zOSMF itself and just select what you want to gather. It'll gather it all up, zip it up, and put it on your workstation. Very, very nice to use. So if you're looking in zOSMF general settings for the diagnostic information, you will now see it in its own application on its own right. Okay, so we're still keeping with that easy upgrade aspect of zOSMF. So the last thing I wanted to talk about in zOSMF for the upgrade action, and I had mentioned it in part 1, is in the network configuration assistant. So in zOS 2.5 for the network configuration assistant plugin, for the policy agent, you will have to import any of your policy agent configuration files before you get to 2.5, because within zOSMF 2.5 for network configuration agent, you will not see an actions to import anymore. Okay, so if you're going to have it, you're going to have it there before you got to zOS 2.5. I don't think that's a problem, because there's a lot of people using network configuration assistant and a lot of them using policy agent itself. So their data is already residing in there, so they don't need to import it in. Now, remember that the TCP/IP stack configuration definitions is not affected by this, just the policy agent configuration files. And that's it. I mean, for zOSMF. So when I look back, if you're on zOS 2.3 going to 2.5 or 2.4 going to 2.5, the zOSMF stuff looks good. It's easy to do. So again, I want to recommend that if you haven't yet got zOSMF on your 2.3 or 2.4 system, you get it there. Okay, really, it's super important, even if, like I mentioned in part 1 for the driving system reason. Okay, so let's move on to SDSF. Actually, did you have any questions? Anybody have any questions about zOSMF? See, the chat's been really quiet. Okay, let's move on to SDSF. So, fire item on this one. We've been mentioning it for, ever, that we really want you to use SAF-based security in order to protect SDSF functions. And that's where the road runs out on zOS 2.5, and that you must be using SAF-based security protection for SDSF now. Okay. So hopefully this does not affect very many people, and that you've heeded the warnings that we've been giving for many, many years about this, and you've already moved to SAF-based protection for SDSF. So if you have not done that yet, you must do this before you upgrade to zOS 2.5. And it might be a significant amount of work. That's why I put a fire on it. So we have created a new guide called the zOS SDSF Security Migration Guide. And I also have noticed that at this conference, there is discussions about this topic as well. And that we also put some material on the GitHub education, which is reflecting some of the information that was presented at this conference as well. So good stuff on this. I would like you to use the documentation. There is a SAF migration aid that is going to be supplied in the JCL dataset as a sample job and is mentioned within the migration guide. And you can see the APAR that provided that as well. And if you've already done this, if you've already got SAF-based security for SDSF, there's nothing for you to do here. And hopefully this is the majority of people. Okay, so do take note of this, very important, and you must do this before you upgrade to zOS 2.5. Okay, one more item about SDSF, and this is a really easy one, is you need to update your path variables to refer to the 64-bit JVM, and this is for the SDSF Java application itself. Okay, so we are removing support for the 31-bit JVM from the SDSF Java application itself, and you need to point to 64-bit. So this is really actually very easy to do. It does not affect any application code. It's just that the SDSF application needs 64-bit Java itself. So this is the look for and change column, and this is what you need to change it to. So you can see here that what I have in bold, it's a very easy change on what you need to put for your path and live path variables. Okay, really easy to do. That's a simple change. No fire on that. Okay, let's keep moving into RACF. So the top one we have for RACF is we have removed the TSO help text for RACF. So if you need help with the RACF commands, it's best to go to the RACF command language reference instead. And if you try to issue a RACF help command in TSO, you're going to see that it says help is not available. Okay, so do note that. I think most people are probably using the books as well, but if you were using TSO help, you need to go use the books. The other thing, the one in the middle here, is a little bit older. It's from zOS 2.4, but it also has a health check, which is important to run, so you'll be okay with it. And what that really turns out to be is if you're using the rack dsert command and you're going to use the RSA pkds keyword, for an RSA private key, you need to make sure that your ECC master key has been put into the CCA. So the health check will just verify that that has happened. Okay, pretty easy to do. I think most people have got past this on zOS 2.4, and the health check here really helps. Okay, the last one is that you can remove, as a hygiene upgrade action, you can remove the RACF dynamic classes that are named IZP and Zoe. This is just a recommendation for hygiene that you can see here. The reason is because in zOS 2.5 RACF, IBM is going to add those IZP and Zoe as supplied in the class descriptor table itself, so you don't need to do that itself. So you want to do this after you've got all your systems at zOS 2.5, then you can do the cleanup for it. But there's a little bit of a complication here because we actually, I think, misdocumented what the correct POSIT value was for IZP and Zoe. And so when you're going to remove it, you need to make sure that you're removing it and you are using the correct POSIT value. So the correct POSIT values, I've double checked that this slide is correct, is 607 for Zoe and 608 for IZP. So before you remove them, make sure that you're using the right POSIT values. There is a reference in the handout on what to do if you need to change the POSIT value before you do the deletion. Okay. Until all the sharing systems are at zOS 2.5, you can ignore the ICH message that you can see here. So this is a little bit of cleanup you can do down the line. All right. OpenSSH, got to include this in any sort of a presentation if you're upgrading from 2.3 to 2.5. This occurred in zOS 2.4 and has given many customers problems. Okay, it is, you know, when we report another higher level into zOS, we're really at the mercy of what the open source code has in it. And the idea of always upward compatibility isn't the forefront of their mind. So what happened in zOS 2.4 is we moved from 6.4 P1 into level 7.6 P1 for OpenSSH. And those two difference of the ported levels is actually quite significant. So we've done a lot of help to try to help with this, and that we have a health check to identify the items that are no longer available to see if you're using them, as well as understanding that there are higher default changes, and we're trying to identify to you that you're using an old default and the new default has changed. So this health check is actually quite extensive, and it has a lot of response in that health check, and you'll want to take a look at that carefully to see what you have. This has been probably for some customers the hardest thing to get through in zOS 2.4. For other customers, they didn't have a problem at all. So I just wanted to say, don't underestimate this. If you're an OpenSSH user, use the health check and identify early what any situation you might have that's changed. zOS 2.5, we did not change the ported level of OpenSSH. It remains at 7.6 P1. So if you're on zOS 2.4 and you've gotten through this item, you don't have to, do anything. It's the same from 2.4 to 2.5, and nothing in the area of OpenSSH for 2.5 new. Unix is all about default changes and actually BPX PRM cleanup. Really good stuff here. Let's look at the first one. So lim message is found in BPX PRM, and it used to have a default of none that says, as you approach the system limits, we're not going to give you a warning. Well, you can see, just by my description of it, that, we could have actually had a better default than none. So in 2.5, the default is going to be system, which means that as you approach system limits and you get to 85% of those limits, we will issue a message such that you could do automation or whatever you want to do about it. And you can change, limits dynamically if you needed to do to help with that, because you know that you're approaching the limit. Or you could, I don't know, cancel a job or a process that is, taking up more than its fair share of system limits, let's say. So anyway, that's lim message. It's a default change. You can change it back if you want. However, I don't think it's probably something you want to change back. It's probably something you want to move forward and talk to your automation folks about to see if there's something you can do for automation there. And the second item on this week is this chart is really about removals of items, removals of stuff that just got obsoleted in zOS Unix. So in 2.4, if you had fork copy or kernel stack specified, go ahead and delete them out. You don't need them, because we're always going to use, as of zOS 2.4 zOS Unix, we're going to use fork copy, and we are going to do kernel stacks above. So regardless of what you say, that is what we're going to use. Therefore, why have it in BPX PRM? And in zOS 2.5 max share pages, we've removed the system storage constraint, and therefore it has no business being in your BPX PRM anymore. So you can just take out max share pages. So that's a good thing as well. All right. So we've got a default change in BPX PRM, and then we have some hygiene to do in BPX PRM. So really easy upgrade for Unix as well. Just two. Okay, we have had Z22 checkpoint mode around since, zOS 2.2, and that was quite a while ago, right? And we can't even, again, coexist 2.2 with 2.5. So everybody, 2.3 or 2.4 users today should be on Z22 checkpoint mode. There is a health check to nicely remind you that you need to be there before you get to zOS 2.5. On zOS 2.5, if you are not in Z22 mode, you will be either having a choice of doing a cold start, or you'll have to fall back and then do the Z22 upgrade at that particular point in time. So the options aren't really great if you are not yet at Z22 option before you get, or Z22 checkpoint mode before you get to zOS 2.5. So, I just did a little activation here. I had a little bit of fun on one of my systems that was not at Z22 mode, and I just did a $deactivate, and it gave me some information about how it's going to be expanded. And also I then did a $activate, and I went to Z22 mode, and everything was good. Remember that you'll need SIL manager support is going to be required if you want a successful activation. And you might see that Z22 mode needs an extra so many number of 4K records in checkpoint 1. So keep an eye on that. I'm thinking that a lot of people are already at Z22 mode, but I put a fire on it because if you're not there yet, you need to be there before you get to 2.5. Okay, now for COM server. So COM server, we've got a couple of little ones, a lot of kind of changes here that we'll see. We've got a health check for this one, and this is if you have TLS SSL support in your FTP server, you're going to need to use ATTLS. I think a lot of people have been using ATTLS already. Most people have, you'll see already. So you'll need to configure your FTP server to use the ATTLS policies instead. There's a health check for that. Just give that one a try. This one right here, the IP services, we keep upping the default for fixed CSM, and you can see a brief history of how this has gone up and up and up over time. As of 2.4, the default is 5.12 meg. It might be that you even have more yourself that you need here. So if you want to see how much you're using, do a DNet, CSM, you get a whole bunch of responses. Look at the message IVT5538I right there, and you can see what you've got for maximum and what your fixed current value is. And keep an eye on that as well. So I'm sure your networking folks know about this change. You can use the health check to identify if you're not using at least the default minimum. And don't forget, there were a lot of smaller communication server removal items in part 1. I know I glossed over them rather quickly yesterday, but they have health checks. And so rather than just talk about them, I would just say, go run the health checks, and the health checks will give you definitive answers on each system that you run them on, whether you're using them or not. And that's really the best way to do it and the easiest way to do it. These are some very older COM server items that we have here, and they're related to storage. So one of them came in a PTF that was on zOS 2.3 to make sure that you have enough storage for IWQ IPsec traffic. And the other one is to make sure you have enough storage if you have QDIO storage is 126. So you can look at that, those information as well. Chances are you've definitely probably got past the first one, and you want to just do some reading to make sure you have enough storage. If you've got QDIO storage 126 in effect. All right, so I'm looking at the time here. I've got a couple more minutes. And so what I usually like to do now is I like to recap all the fire items. Because if I've put you to sleep during the other part of this presentation, this is the part to wake up. That's why I made the screen really yellow so that you might see that this is important stuff. This is if you're coming from 2.3 to 2.4 or 2.3 to 2.5. This is what happened in zOS 2.4 across both presentations that I want to highlight to you. Okay, so we're bringing it all together, part 1 and part 2 here. First of all, 8 gigabytes of memory once you're on Z14 or higher. Okay, make sure that you've got that, and there's a health check for that. There's health checks for a lot of these, which I really love. The second one was remember user key common removal, 3 things, and RACF only helps with one of them. Okay, so do keep a good eye on that and understand if you're impacted, what you're going to do about that. And remember to look at vendor products as well. Make sure you're on the correct level of vendor products for that. The next one is number 3. So that was the SMB removal. Hopefully it won't impact a lot of people, but if you are using SMB, you do need to understand that in 2.4 it was removed. And then in 4, I talked about this in this presentation, which was a lot of the defaults going from HTTP to HTTPS, good defaults, and we've got health checks to help you identify that you're using HTTPS. And for ARM FDDS, that's the ATTLS. And then also, here's a big one, the OpenSSH higher ported level of 7.6p1. That one's been a little rough for some customers. So keep a good eye on that one. And if you're already at 2.4, this one is behind you. You don't have to worry about it. Okay, so that's what happens in 2.4 if you're on the 2.3 to 2.5 path. And if you're on 2.4 to 2.5, this is what's happening in 2.5. So as I'd mentioned in part 1, zOSMF server pack, you're going to have zOSMF as a driving system requirement. And I would strongly heed my advice from yesterday, which is learn how to install a portable software instance before you get to zOS 2.5 as a portable software instance, because I really would like to make sure that your driving system is set up correctly and that you know the general flow through the user interface so that you don't get confused or misunderstand what's happening, because it is a different type of install. HFS removal 2.5 finally happening. Okay, so you guys should have no more HFSs before you get to 2.5, and there are several utility capabilities that you can do to make sure that you're off of HFS. Only SAF-based security for SDSF functions. That's another one that we've been mentioning for a very long time. You should be done with that before you get to zOS 2.5, as well as activating Z22 mode. Shouldn't be a hard one to get to Z22 mode. Just make sure you get there before you're on zOS 2.5. And then the last one is perform those updates for the RMF structural changes. So like I said, RMF changes haven't been, modified at all. You still have the good old RMF that you know and love. You still order RMF on ShopZ. However, the installation packaging configuration looks very different. And remember that you have link list, LPA list, APF list, and also the sysproc change that you have to update, as well as some security changes. Not hard to do, just don't forget to use it so that you can use RMF on 2.5. Also, we want to talk about the next release after zOS 2.5, and that is for IBM is removing JES 3 and also BDT. I should have put that on this slide. Okay, so that is what we have. And after this, it just gets all of the non-fire items, which is a summary. So we talked about new address spaces. We talked about the BCP default changes. DFSMS was all changes that were in 2.4. HCD, do some clean out for those old processor types. Crypto has easy stuff. Just make sure that your parameter is using a PDS and not a sequential data set to specify CSF parm. Make sure that you don't reference any of those super old parts if you're going to do a recompile or a relink. For zOSMF, we've got the desktop, we've got the diagnostic assistant. Make sure that you have imported those policy agent configuration files. RACF TSO help is gone. You need to use the books instead. Make sure that those dynamic classes have the right posit values before you take it. For Unix, it's all about BPX, PRM, default change, and then cleaning stuff out, easy stuff for Unix. And then COM server, it's about more secure communications for the FTP server using ATTLS, and also some storage impacts that we had seen there. So if I'm looking from 2.4 to 2.5, and I think about those fire items, let me go back to them. Here they are. And if I'm okay with this already, I've already removed HFS. I've already used SDSF SAF. I'm already at JES 2 mode, and I've got those RMF ones under control. Really, the zOSMF server pack, it's really, I think, probably the biggest thing that is there. And if you know how to install a portable software instance with zOSMF, overall, I think an upgrade between 4 and 5 is rather simple. Okay, I'm trying to get to that. If you can get it installed with zOSMF, that's the big change. And now you've seen all of the major upgrade items that you see here, and they're really not that complicated. So anyone that's on 2.4, once you get past the install and you learn that, I really think that the upgrade should be very stable for you. We don't have OpenSSH considerations, which we have had in the past. And user key common is behind us, once we're on 2.4. All right. So I just had a real quick chart from the planning, where we talked about a lot of the stuff using fixed cats, using the workflow, making sure that you understand coexistence and fallback. And that's really about it. Okay, I'd like to remind you to submit your session feedback. I'd love to hear what you think. My email is on the cover. So this is session 7AP, and let me go one more slide. Yep, it's back to the cover so you can see my email is there. I know we have a couple of more minutes. Did you have any questions at all? I'm sorry, while you're typing this question, I have something I have to do. Hold on just a second.
Questions, like Marna said, just enter. Don't forget that at 3:30 UK time, we will have another session, this time about the zOS terminal extensions part 2. So it's the continuation from yesterday's session.
Hey guys, thank you very much. I'm really sorry I had to step away for just a second there.
Fine.
I don't see any questions though. You guys are all doing pretty well, huh?
They are very shy.
Now, I know this group has never been very shy. When I'm in Whittlebury, I usually have a lot of conversations, you know, before and after, and even good questions during. So.
Anna, thank you very much. Again, brilliant session, very informative. I'll see you guys for the next session. Marna,
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.